Hello and welcome to Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business. Joining me today is Damien Mills, who is Executive Vice President of JLL. Thanks for joining us today, Damien.
Thanks for the invite, Mario. Hope you're well.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about a survey that JLL did recently called the Worker Preferences Barometer. Some interesting insights out of that survey. The first thing I wanted to ask you about was this idea of office nostalgia being huge, especially in exceptional offices. 69% of people who were highly satisfied by their work environment strongly miss that environment. Can you talk a little bit about that and why that is?
Well, I won't pretend to be the definitive expert on it, but listening to the clients we have in and around Calgary and North America, I think the interesting thing is, I think our community is tired of the isolation. You know, I think we're all super excited as Alberta reopens to go and have a coffee with a friend. And the reality is the office is clearly part of that ecosystem. People have struggled with isolation. It's meant, really adaptive behaviors to try and stay productive. And I think people are ready for a relief. They're ready to get back into the office, to be with their peers, and put the whole COVID isolation thing behind them.
Yeah. One of the findings from the report said that 63% of the workers want to keep the possibility of alternate workplaces. So do you see that going forward as maybe even a hybrid of sorts out there for people working sometimes in the office, sometimes not?
I think it's an interesting stat. Obviously, COVID has heightened the awareness of work from home, but the whole concept of a mobile workforce is not new. It's that a lot of companies have been moving that way since a long time prior to COVID. I think what COVID really did was kind of load test the system. We actually forced people to be isolated. We forced a significant test on our resiliency to work from a mobile platform throughout the last 18 months. And I think largely companies have come through that fairly effectively. We saw productivity remain. There's still questions about how effective and how productive people really are. But the early news was that the systems that support mobile workforce did work. The fact that you and I are talking on Zoom rather than somewhere like that just demonstrated that they could do that. And I think what it has done now is accelerated the fact that people like flexibility. People like the idea of work-life balance. We hear that all the time. I think that's what we're really starting to see is that we tested the system, it worked, we demonstrated companies could be resilient, and now the average worker is saying, well, it works. Can I have that flexibility in my daily diet going forward?
Yeah, when you mentioned the flexibility, I found interesting that the report talks about flexibility of the workplace being almost the top priority for workers as opposed to their salary.
Yeah, and I think as technology informs our day-to-day activities, we realize that the barriers of a standard work week, the concept of a 9 to 5. Who hasn't checked their email long before 9 a.m.? Who's not still checking their email after 7 p.m.? So the barriers of the workday have blurred. And I think this has accelerated the anticipation that with those blurred barriers, maybe I do need a better work from life balance. And maybe I do need the flexibility to have a 2-hour window in my day so I can watch my kids play soccer at 3:30 and things like that. So I think the whole system was tested, as I already said, and it's facilitated the chance to reevaluate what does work from home versus work from work look like. And I do believe people are going to look for flexibility, and it's going to become a dynamic process. I think companies are also realizing that there's an opportunity buried here. If we can provide that greater flexibility, maybe it does become part of our recruiting and retention strategies to as we put pressure on people to blur the margins of their workday, giving them more flexibility may be very supportive of our HR policies.
Yeah. One of the interesting stats that I found from the report, and we talked a little bit about productivity, and it's declining on the home front. So 37% feel they're more productive at home than they are in the office. That's down though from 48% a year ago. Why do you think there's a decline there in that perception?
I think as a rule, companies are designed for communities, not isolated individuals. And so I think for a while there, we realized we could be productive, but with time, this platform is not the same as being face-to-face. And I think people have a certain amount of exhaustion. A year and a half is a long time. Obviously, in April 2020, I don't think any of us believed we would be out of the office more than 60, 90 days.
Yeah.
Here we are 365 days later and still have this forced isolation. So I think there's a certain amount of exhaustion and a boomerang effect in people's perception because of that exhaustion of being at home for an extended period of time. But I think there are other factors at play here. There's a huge population that may have young kids. And when the young kids came home, it's hard to be productive. It's hard to stay focused.
Yeah.
You've seen, I've got older kids, so it's less of a problem, but I can tell you bandwidth in our house, with 5 people in our house, bandwidth becomes an issue. So, there's lots of ways. It's hard to truly measure productivity in any fashion. These are sort of engagement studies where we're asking people their opinions, and people are starting to say, yeah, well, I think I'm exhausted. And we've seen other studies that JLL has done that after 2 days at home, there seems to be a tipping point in productivity. So there seems to be a balance required. And I'm not that surprised by that because, again, our ecosystem of work is designed about collaboration and knowledge transfer and bringing people together to really inform the creative process and accelerate operations and growth of companies. And I just don't think the isolated platform or just technology facilitates that 100%. So there are some limiting factors, and it's not that surprising that we see not only people's response being that they want to get back to work and be more productive with their peers, but also there does seem to be this tipping point after 2 days where people again need to be part of that ecosystem in the office.
Yeah, no matter how things unfold from this whole idea of the workforce, where they're working, there's no doubt that the trend is there for flexible work. The trend is there for working from home. What implications does that have for the real estate industry and office space in our market in the future?
I think it's interesting when I look back at other big events that have impacted behavior sort of on a global scale. When we think of the change to transportation and travel post 9/11, it's fundamentally changed our perspective of how we walk into an airport, how we get through security. And again, it was the safety and well-being of the individual traveler. And I think that's probably one of the big factors that we are going to see having gone through COVID is first and foremost the well-being of our staff. Is it safe to bring them back? Is this beehive of activity in a consolidated people around, is it safe? And I think people are starting to look at the office space and go, what steps do we have to take to make sure that we can maintain this resiliency, not lose productivity by isolating people for an extended period of time? So first and foremost, I would expect people to really look at the well-being of their staff, the mental well-being. Obviously, there's been a huge toll on the mental health of individuals over the year and a half, and companies are starting to react to that. And are we going to see changes in the environment? Are we going to see more space between individuals? I'm not saying we have to put up walls, but do we need to does social distancing become a permanent part of the plan? And I think it's too early to tell, but I do think companies are going to react to the well-being of their employees first and foremost, and especially as they all believe they do need to have some form of re-entry back into the workplace. Because I think very few companies will be ready to embrace a permanent work from home strategy. I think the reality that our corporate culture is around the connectedness of our people. And so the technology can't support that permanently. So people are going to have a work from work strategy. It will be balanced with the well-being of the employee and the opportunity to provide that employee greater flexibility, which is also part of the well-being strategy as that line we talked about, the blurring of the work-life balance.
Yeah. Well, will companies need less space then going forward?
It's hard to tell, unless it really comes down to, is my workspace designed for an individual, so each individual owns a desk? Even if you're working from home 2 days a week and 3 days in the office, you still need a place to be. And I don't think it's easy to say we can just force mobility ratios. So mobility ratios are the number of people that are using the same desk. So, if we can increase the activity where one person uses a desk for 2 days and then another person uses it for 2 days, obviously we've cut the need for space in half. But again, that's harder to manage than you think, because if we're going to come back to work 3 days in a 5-day work week, we don't have that same overlap. And people probably want to have Monday and Friday, so everybody's in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I think it's too early to tell. I know companies are looking at those strategies. They're looking at the math. They're looking at what mobility ratios would do to reduce area. But I think it's too early to tell whether that becomes a permanent solution as we provide greater flexibility in the diet. At the end of the day, someone needs somewhere to sit and somewhere to work, and they want to be with their peers. So there may not be the same level of overlap of opportunity to have multiple people in the same seat in the same week.
Okay, super. Thanks very much, Damien, for joining us today.
Thank you, Mario. Take care.
All right, super. That was Damien Mills, who is Executive Vice President of JLL here in Calgary. This has been Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business. Thanks for joining us today.